Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of this series, Supervillain Spotlight. This time we are looking at the supervillains that first plagued Superman in the 1950s. We have some heavy hitters here at the end of the list, including one that is strongly rumored to be the main villain in the next Superman movie. Of course, we will get to that. Kicking off our episode today is an obscure villain by the name of Moon Man. His real name, Bryce Rogers. He's an astronaut, and we have a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation going on here. He first appeared in World's Finest, number 98, cover dated May 1959. Just a reminder, of course, as we refer to comic book first appearances, we refer to their cover dates, which are not always the same as the month they were published. What happened was that comic book companies like DC could get their comics on the shelves longer if they put the cover date later on in the year. So their comic on the bookshelves in the store maybe in March, but if they put a date that was May, then it could stay on the shelf until May. So that is the discrepancy between such things. So we're going with cover date because that's just the easiest thing to do here. World's Finest, 98, May 1959. Bryce Rogers from the good old US of A. He is an astronaut, and his origin story is that he volunteered for a flight to the moon and was assisted by Superman, but during that flight, he unfortunately crossed the path of some kryptonite radioactivity, courtesy of a asteroid passing by, and as a result, he delved down into a Jekyll and Hyde scenario where by night he became the Moon Man and went on various crime expeditions, typically stealing things that related to the moon. And in his normal identity, was not aware of this even happening. So he was very surprised to find the Moon Man's secret hideout in his own house and called the police on himself without realizing. And eventually, Superman and Batman figured out what was going on. Moonman was brought to justice, kind of, as it were, after he was recruited by a bunch of bad guys to plan their heists. Moonman then figured out what was going on. And when I say Moonman, I mean Bryce Rogers, and helped Batman and Superman bring all the other bad guys in. The powers eventually wore off, and Moonman really became no more. We did not see much of him in the way of other comic book appearances from that point on. He does have a kind of a cool costume. It reminds me a lot of Dr. Midnight, the superhero. Not quite enough to get him farther up this list. Quick review of the points breakdown. We've got 5 points each in each category: personality, powers, mythology and backstory, design, and cultural impact. Cultural impact being impact in non-comic mode, such as TV shows, etc. So for Moonman, uh, very, very slight influence in the world of comics. So his personality we have at 2, powers ranked 2, mythology and backstory, and cultural impact both at a 1, and his design as a 2. That gives him a total of 8. So that is where we leave Moonman. And we move over to our second villain. This is the Thing from 40,000 AD. We actually don't know his name. He's just from the future. He first appeared in Superman 87, February 1954. He was created by William Woolfolk and Wayne Boring, and very clearly a mashup of a couple sci-fi villains, namely the Blob and the Thing from Another World, from the old black and white monster film days. And I say that because he arrives on Earth from the future. He's exiled because he is a criminal in the future. And he kind of shows up as just a creeping protoplasmic creature. And he quickly, so that's the blob aspect. He quickly sees the creatures around him, starts mimicking them, which is the Thing aspect. And eventually comes into conflict with Superman because he pretends to be Superman. He can also mimic Superman's powers, so flight and super strength. So it's a pretty even matchup. The Thing also has the benefit of being able to hide in plain sight. So it took Superman a while to track him down. The Thing was caught in a bomb blast and was assumed to be completely defeated. And that was the case until quite a few years later when the creature showed up on the planet Karak. It was assembling a replica of the city of Metropolis, and the Omega Men showed up and were like, "What's Superman doing? I don't understand." Of course, it wasn't Superman. They fought him. The Omega Men actually won. Superman then showed up and explained that this must be the creature he fought from 40,000 AD. They assumed he was dead. It's actually the case where we're not sure if this creature can actually die because as of now, he's currently vapor-like entity on this planet still. Still a chance that this character will make a comeback. Could be essentially immortal. We're not quite sure. Personality is a 2. Powers are a 3, primarily because he can mimic other people's superpowers. Mythology and backstory is a 2. Design and cultural impact, both 1s. That is the creature from 40,000 AD. Moving on, we will go to a particularly interesting villain who has gone by quite a few names. His name is Robert Hobb. He's gone by Humpty Dumpty, the Curator, the Hobby Robber. His names for himself are actually probably um, unfortunately for him, the most he has going. His biggest claim to fame is that he was the first repeating supervillain for the Superboy comics. His first appearance was Superboy number 6 in January 1950, and he is from Smallville. Not really too much to talk about in the way of superpowers. He's just got a knack for mechanical engineering, and he's a halfway decent strategist. He basically steals other people's hobbies, which is why he's called the Hobby Robber. Not the same character as the future Humpty Dumpty from Batman comics. But he first came into conflict with Superboy because he was, unfortunately for the residents of Smallville, going around stealing their collections. He would ride a mechanical hobby horse away from the police, and that is how he would escape. Eventually brought down by Superboy and only returned a few times in that comic book. Much later, by quite a bit of years, he showed up with a new name, calling himself the Curator. That also did not last very long for him. Humpty Dumpty, aka the Curator, aka the Hobby Robber, aka Robert Hobb. Moving on to number 7. One of the things I love about talking about supervillains is that there's a lot of them, and they all have these different stories that have different wrinkles. The heroes always, of course, find a way to save the day and triumph. And sometimes it happens that you have people like Klaxar, this particular villain, who just can't really catch a break, which is something you don't normally associate with Kryptonians. So Klaxar is from the planet Krypton. He first appeared in Superboy number 67. That's in September 1958. And he is a scientific genius from Krypton, which, Superman is often called the last son of Krypton. But I think it's really interesting that even this early on in comic book history, there were already plenty of other villains coming from Krypton. So it's really kind of interesting. Why doesn't Superman know about the existence of these people, and why does he keep getting surprised, I think is the better question, that there's other survivors. Klaxar, scientist, evil scientist, of course, from Krypton, he was working on weaponry, and unfortunately for him, the planet of Krypton is a very peaceful planet. So Jor-El, who's Superman's father, and the other Kryptonians decided that Klaxar had to be exiled. They exiled him from the planet, sent him to outer space, and there he plotted his revenge, right? Because of course that's what evil scientists do. So he created this device he called a sky mine, and he was going to use it to attack Krypton. He was using something called Atron rays, And two things went wrong for him. The first is that the Skymine was a dud. It didn't work. Krypton blew up without any assistance from him. To make things worse, the Atron rays halted his ability to absorb yellow sunlight. So we know that Superman gets his superpowers from the Earth's yellow sun. So Klaxar, by using Atron rays, negated that ability, which comes back to haunt him later, which is when he comes across Kal-El on Earth and decides, I need to steal his superpowers. He figures Superboy doesn't know that the Skymine doesn't work. So he essentially says, listen, I'm going to blow up Earth with this Skymine. I blew up Krypton, and I'm going to do the same thing to your planet again if you don't come with me. From there, he was going to work on a scheme to transfer superpowers from Superman to himself. Superboy figures out that the Skymine's a dud, calls his bluff basically. Once again, Klaxar is exiled to space. Later on, he is apprehended and brought to a prison planet by the name of Cronus. That is where he remains as far as we know. So poor Klaxar, just absolutely brilliant. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's not, because he can't get anything to go his way. So, unfortunately for him, and fortunately for our heroes, Klaxar is not much of a menace. Although I think it would be fun to have him brought back to see if he can be like painted as some sort of incompetent buffoon again. Speaking of incompetent buffoons, this character that is next actually isn't one for the most part. His name is Atom Master. We also don't know his real name. He's from somewhere on Earth and first appeared in World's Finest 101, May of 1959. Actually, before we move on, we went over everyone else's ratings, but not Klaxar's. Klaxar, personality 2, powers 2, mythology 2, cultural impact 1, design 2. So grand total of 9, just like some of these other characters. Atom Master, you could think of as DC's version of Mysterio, except Mysterio is an A-list villain. Atom Master is absolutely not an A-list villain. And Atom Master has an even more ridiculous helmet than Mysterio does, which is hard to believe. He has a helmet that essentially looks like a neck brace. So, brilliant scientist, not so much in terms of making cool looking things, though. Atom Master originally was able to just create illusions like Mysterio and use those illusions to make people think that Batman and Superman were robbing banks, causing general mayhem, which of course was not the case. There's this really fun panel where Batman and Superman figure out what's going on, and Batman goes up to the top of a building and shouts to everybody, I was framed, it wasn't really me, and everybody's like, oh, okay, we believe you, Batman. And that is such a golden age of comics thing to do. Like, that would never happen, today. Everyone would demand more proof, and it would take forever to find it and everything. But yeah, just take Batman at his word. He didn't do it. So they pursue Atom Master. At this point, he has figured out how to essentially solidify the molecules in the air. So his illusions are becoming real, which means they can actually cause damage. And Batman and Superman show up, defeat his goons. Atom Master actually appears to have the upper hand to the point where he threatens to kill Batman unless Superman leaves him alone. So Superman's like, okay, I give up, and then leaves, comes back at super speed, and defeats Atom Master, and that is very anticlimactic because that is the end of his caper. Until years later, he's recruited for, get this, the Forgotten Villains. That's literally the name of the group he's recruited in. And they, of course, face the Forgotten Heroes. Yes, exactly. And the people on Atom Master's team included such legendary names as the Faceless Hunter, Cracklow the Sorcerer, and Mr. Poseidon, which are obviously household names that you've heard of, right? Not so much. Again, they were defeated by the Forgotten Heroes. Personality, powers, mythology and backstory and design, all 2s for Atom Master. And typically something as ugly as his helmet would net him a 1 for design, but it's just so ugly that I had to give it a 2. It's like when you play a video game and your high score gets so high that you restart back at 0. That's that's the mythology. Mythology? Methodology is what I was looking for. Cultural impact, 1. Has not shown up in anything except comics. Atom Master nets a total of 9. We journey back to Krypton for villain who is number 5. It's actually a team of villains called the Evil Three from Krypton. Usually I don't group teams together because there's such a typical change in who's a part of that group. And you have villains that are more influential than others that are part of groups. For example, if we were doing Marvel, I probably wouldn't put the Sinister Six on a list because the villains can all carry that weight on their own. In this particular case, they can't. So the Evil Three, 3 brothers, they show up in the pages of Superman number 65, July 1950. And their 3 names are Yuban, Kizo, and Mala. The particular wrinkle they bring to the table is that once they arrive on Earth, they have the same superpowers as Superman. So they present quite the challenge. Their origin on Krypton, they created a device that removed moisture from the atmosphere on Krypton. And Superman's father, Jor-El, was able to devise a way to defeat them. And once again, like most Kryptonian villains, they were exiled. This is before they came up with the Phantom Zone, so people were not being exiled to the Phantom Zone like General Zod was. Instead, they were placed in suspended animation and sent on a spaceship to drift. Their spaceship crashed into Earth. They initially didn't seem to have much of a problem with Superman until 2 things happened. Number 1, they found out that he was Jor-El's son. Number 2, they planned to take over the world, which Superman is not on board with, of course. So they go and start their plan. Eventually, what has to happen is Superman has to figure out a way to take down 3 villains that all essentially have his superpowers. The advantage that Superman has is that he's been on Earth longer, so he is still technically a little bit more used to these powers. So he eventually figures out a way to wear them down and trick them into getting on their spaceship again, back into suspended animation status. And they've appeared a little bit since, not really too much, and they have not shown up outside of comic books. Although there was an episode of The Adventures of Superman called the Evil Three. Not sure if it was a coincidence, but it does not refer to these 3 characters. All they have is their comic book appearances, their personality 2, powers 3, a mythology rating of 3, because they were the first Kryptonians after Superman to arrive on Earth. Design 2, cultural impact 1, that nets them a total of 11 points. For villain number 4, we have someone who's not so much a villain as a force of nature, and that is Titano, the super ape, as he is called on occasion. If the Thing from 40,000 AD was a riff on the Blob and the Thing from Another World, Titano is definitely a riff on King Kong. Little different backstory though, because Titano was originally just a plain ordinary chimp. He was living essentially as a laboratory assistant, if you want to call it that. Guinea pig might be another term, although chimpanzees probably resent being called guinea pigs. He was sent to outer space. Kryptonite struck again, so not only does it hurt Superman, it also creates some pretty negative effects on other creatures. When he arrived back on Earth, when Titano arrived back on Earth, he got a lot taller, a lot stronger, went on a rampage throughout Metropolis, knocking over buildings, etc. And Superman eventually, to solve this problem, relied on the old standby: send the big, giant chimp back in time so that he can live with the dinosaurs and other creatures that are his kind of creature. So he doesn't have to knock over buildings anymore. So standard operating procedure for the 1950s, send the creature back in time. That's where he stayed for a while. He has bounced back quite a few times since then. There's been quite a few different origin stories for the character as well, and this is a good time to remind people that DC is notorious for their reboots. So there's a lot of different things starting over again when they reboot. Writers get a chance to retell origin stories. At one point, Titano was a cyborg with kryptonite vision. Sometimes he had kryptonite vision and wasn't a cyborg. Sometimes he didn't have kryptonite vision. So a lot of different itinerations. Seems to be a constant character that does keep showing up after these reboots and pretty consistently essentially a force of nature and not a straight up villain. He has actually appeared in quite a few things outside the comic book world. The New Adventures of Superman, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League Action. There's a cameo of him in Superman and Lois. So he's the first character on this list that actually has had a life past comic books. Titano, personality 1, because he's an ape, he's a chimp. Powers 3, mythology and backstory 2, design 3, cultural impact 3, for a total of 12. Okay, time for the heavy hitters, which means number 3 is Metallo, aka John Corbin, from Metropolis. He first appeared in Action Comics 252, May 1959. He started out like your stereotypical crook, bank robber, nothing really too big on his radar, not a world conquering type, nothing like that. Gets into a car accident. His life is saved by a professor, but in order to have his life saved, unfortunately for him, he gets a cyborg body. His cyborg body is powered at first by uranium, which, as we all know, is a super healthy thing. And he's also super durable as a result of this. So he goes on and decides, hey, my life of crime is going to be great. Now I'm pretty much not stoppable, except for, of course, Superman, but crooks don't really think that far in advance sometimes. What ends up happening is his uranium heart starts to run out of power. The professor tells him there's a way to replace the power source with either uranium or another element, which turns out to be kryptonite. So then he says, well, I've got to continue my life. I'm going to go find some kryptonite, which he does. Of course, this causes problems for Superman. Eventually, he decides in his wisdom that he's going to take the first step, get Superman out of the way for once and for all, and then he'll be able to continue his criminal enterprise. Unfortunately, Corbin gets both real kryptonite and a prop replica of kryptonite, and he picks the wrong one, uses that in his Superman killing scheme. Of course, doesn't affect Superman, who is then able to catch up with Corbin, defeat him, and that could have been it. That could have been it for Corbin, because there's actually at this point not a lot that differentiates him with other villains of this time. Both in last episode and this episode, there's a lot of villains that really don't have a lot going for them. They show up once or twice, they go away. They don't really have lasting impact. That's where Metallo could have stayed. He did not. One of the very rare villains where writers down the road then brought him back and started expanding on his story. He turned into still kind of your stereotypical criminal, but powered by a kryptonite heart. So Superman would show up to a bank robbery. Oh no, there's a kryptonite powered villain here. That's a challenge. It's not just a typical bank robbery. But Corbin didn't have any, again, world conquering plans. Then he met some other bad guys. Lex Luthor, for example, the Joker, Neuron, Brainiac. See, because Corbin's not a genius by any stretch of the imagination. But these villains show up and they say, hey, you got a cyborg body, you got kryptonite. Superman is severely allergic to this rock. So why don't we give you an upgrade? So he's gotten quite a few upgrades over the years. He can now morph his metal body, kind of like Cyborg. He can control metal around him. At one point, he was able to grow up to the size of a small building. And so he became a lot bigger threat to Superman once he started working with these other villains. Now, when we went through the reboots that DC does, his origin story was changed a bit, actually quite a few times, but it stays consistent for the most part. Now he's a soldier. He volunteered for weapons testing, and that is what led him to the kryptonite heart as opposed to a car accident. So, soldier breaking bad as opposed to a crook staying bad is where we're at now with Metallo. Exact details shift a little bit from reboot to reboot. Generally about the same. That's Metallo. He is a really interesting character if you get a chance to read because, again, he's got this power, but he's almost never the grand schemer. It's always someone else that is in charge, whether it's the government, whether it's Brainiac or Luthor. And there's even an element where he feels a little Joker-like at times because he's more chaotic. He doesn't have a solid plan like someone like Luthor would. And so that makes it also difficult for Superman to handle Metallo. He's been in a lot of different universes aside from the comic pages. Smallville, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Superman the Animated Series, playable character in Lego Batman 3 and Lego DC Supervillains, is a boss enemy in the video games Superman 64, Shadow of Apocalypse, and The Man of Steel. Also, there was a BBC Superman broadcast adaptation in 1990 where Metallo was the primary villain. And very interesting character for Superman to deal with. Very hard to pin down, and that's what makes him a classic. And again, super interesting to go through the history and realize that this is just one of a lot of villains that could have just been left by the wayside and forgotten about, like a lot of the characters on this list. And now he is legendary because we had writers that kept adding to his story instead of just letting it be, which is pretty cool. For Metallo, personality and powers, 3 apiece. Mythology, design, and cultural impact, 4, 4, and 4. That's a grand total of 18 for our friend Metallo. At number 2, we have Bizarro, and Bizarro is not only confusing in the stories, like how he talks, because he talks backwards and says opposite things, like "me am great hero" when he means he's a great villain, but also his origin very convoluted as well, which is appropriate. In the pages of Superboy, there's a scientist who has a duplicator array. This duplicator array creates faulty copies of things, which is what happens when Kal-El is accidentally captured in the duplicator array. Now you might say, oh, this is the first appearance of the iconic character Bizarro, so it goes on from here. That's where it gets a little convoluted. This creature actually perishes at the end of that comic. So there's a lot of places that list this issue of Superboy as Bizarro's first appearance. Not so, because that character ceases to exist at the end of that issue. In Action Comics 254 in 1959, Lex Luthor develops a ray based on the plans for this previous ray that the other scientist had put together. He uses it on Superman to create a clone. This clone is called Bizarro number 1 and is the Bizarro that has maintained his presence in comics since. So yes, the second Bizarro to appear is the one that had staying power and is also the one that is called Bizarro #1, which is just great for comic book history that the character of Bizarro has that wrinkle. Because it makes sense, because he's a character where everything is backwards. Bizarro has essentially the superpowers of Superman, but in reverse in most cases. So he can fly like Superman. He doesn't have heat vision, he has cold vision. He doesn't have cold breath like Superman, he has heat breath. Everything is backwards. He has since moved off planet, where he generally comes from a planet. It's Earth backwards is the name of this planet. So I think it's Htrae, Htrae. It's shaped like a cube. That's where Bizarro typically lives. He'll show up every once in a while to battle Superman and cause general havoc. There's also been times where he has acted as a hero. This, unfortunately for him, does not last. Lex Luthor, many times, has used Bizarro as a weapon to try to take out Superman. He's not a very complex character. He's not a very smart character. He's pretty stupid. He just has essentially a one-track mind on something. In fact, most recently, he decided that he was going to use magic against Superman because Superman is very allergic to magic. And so Bizarro was like, well, if he's allergic to magic, that means I must be super powered by it. And that was his latest scheme. It appears that maybe Bizarro died as a result of that, but it's comics. No one really stays dead. Bizarro #1, if you came across him on the street, he would probably introduce himself to you as me am Bizarro, because that's how he talks. He has been featured in the live-action TV shows Superboy, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, Smallville, and Superman and Lois. The animated shows Challenge of the Super Friends, The Superpowers Team, Galactic Guardians, Superman the Animated Series, and other DC animated shows and films. He's a legendary character, one of the top villains in DC, even though he is not your typical villain, especially in the Superman world, where a lot of the villains, because they can't match up to Superman in a fist fight, will be lifted up in intelligence. Bizarro, definitely not. Definitely not. But he's lasted as a mirror image of Superman, and that can create some interesting stories as well. Points breakdown for Bizarro: personality 4, powers 4, mythology 4, design 3, cultural impact 5, and we're giving him that. Usually, a signal of cultural impact being a 5 is if the character has appeared in a movie. Bizarro has not, although many people think that the evil Superman, Ultraman from the most recent Superman film, will eventually return as Bizarro. But when your name has become a common part of speech, that's pretty much as influential as you can get. So Bizarro, 20 total for his supervillain ranking. Now we get to, last but certainly not least, we get to Brainiac, yet another character who has a name that has lasted in our English language and become something that we call people who are super smart, like Brainiac. Now, the wrinkle to this is that there was a computer that was developed around the same time that was called Brainiac, completely separate from the character, complete coincidence according to the writers. I think it's probably a good sign of the supervillain being the source of that, because he was a Superman villain and the popularity of Superman was great at the time. And there's been plenty of keyboards and monitors and computers that have come and gone throughout the years, even back in the 50s. And they don't really last as far as names being applied to everyday life, whereas Brainiac has. Brainiac, also known as Vril Dox, also known as the Collector of Worlds, first appeared in Action Comics 242, July 1958. He was created by Otto Binder and Al Plastino. He's from the planet Kolu. Brainiac is a super fun character. His origin and the reboots of it, and I'm trying not to beat on a dead horse here, but the reboots in the DC universe do make things more complicated. In Brainiac's case, it works out totally in his favor because it creates this like fog of war aspect of it where you're not really sure what Brainiac is real, what's not, what's going on. Brainiac started out as an alien scientist, takes his spaceship around the universe, and basically steals cities. And over the course of this venture, he got the shrunken city of Kandor from Krypton. And this is awesome because this is way back in his first appearance in 1958, and the bottle city of Kandor has lasted through Superman mythology to this day. So his very first appearance, it was right there and it's lasted all this time, which is just awesome to think that something so integral to his first story is still lasting. So it wasn't something like the mythology of, Lex Luthor or Metallo was built up and become iconic. First appearance, there's the bottle city of Kandor. Superman is obviously grateful to see the city saved because it is a remnant of Krypton. Less happy that Brainiac has it in his spaceship. So Brainiac originally is planning on finding his own planet to rule over, putting all these cities on the planet, and he's going to be king. Superman, not a fan of that plan, takes the bottle city back with him. Typically, it resides at the Fortress of Solitude. Based on what story you read, sometimes removing Kandor from Krypton was why Krypton exploded, sometimes not. So unwittingly, Brainiac may have saved a lot of Kryptonians from destruction. Now, this origin story shifted, and it didn't wait for a reboot to shift because it kind of retconned. So it was changed so that he actually wasn't a scientist operating on his own. He was essentially an artificial intelligence from his home planet. The residents of that planet, super smart, they created essentially a bunch of AI beings to run their world. As we know about AI, it doesn't listen to us, so it took over the world. That's what happens. AI does that. Those AI beings became known as the computer tyrants of Kolu. So when the computer tyrants took over, they then created Brainiac, sent him off to outer space to essentially act as a spy and potentially report back and say, hey, this might be a good planet we could send ships to conquer. So now we have Brainiac established as an AI, which is essential because the next thing that can happen is that writers now have this ability to step outside the typical cliche of having to find new ways of supervillains surviving. So, oh my gosh, Lex Luthor's spaceship fell out of the sky. How did he survive? Even this early on in comic history, there's it established that Brainiac can just be a computer program and come back in a different shell, essentially. His next big step in Brainiac's story was when he kind of got a facelift. He returned to prominence with his skull ship and a brand new robotic look. It's a very 80s look for a sci-fi villain that is essentially an AI despot. He is able to project his consciousness into humans. He has drones that he sends off as part of his own army. He essentially has almost limitless resources when it comes to creating new robotic copies of himself. And this is obviously a huge problem because even today in the comics, it's not clear when he's defeated, are you defeating Brainiac or are you defeating a shell of Brainiac? He is frequently recruited by Luthor or people in the Legion of Doom. Typically doesn't last that long. Brainiac has what's called a 12th level intelligence. And that means he's smarter than Batman, smarter than Mr. Terrific, one of the smartest creatures in existence. During some stories, especially during the Convergence story, they call it, he almost becomes omniscient with how intelligent he is. So usually if he gets recruited for a group like the Legion of Doom, at some point his motivation is going to be a lot different, and he is just not going to have time with them. So I remember reading, I think the most recent time they tried to recruit him for the Legion of Doom, and it just being this sense of, okay, I'm here, but I'm here at my own whim. I'm the most powerful person here, and I just might leave because you guys just might not be interesting enough for me, and I'm going to take off. And that is another interesting wrinkle that Brainiac has, because it's almost like no villains really have enough to offer him. So if they give something that he's kind of interested in as motivation, he might be interested enough to hang around, see what happens, but then he's gone. There's no reason for him to stick around if things are not going well. And he's got plenty of backup plans. Also, in the way of actual like superpowers, not just that he is super smart, has a lot of superpowers that can put him toe to toe with Superman. Obviously, it depends on if it's a drone or whatever aspect is being used by Brainiac, but super strength, super durability, super speed, energy manipulation, force fields, mind control is a huge issue. Brainiac will be the villain in the next Superman movie. I've even seen a rumor where Wallace Shawn may be portraying him. That is heavily a rumor. I'm not putting any weight in that. I don't put weight on internet rumors. It's just inconceivable that that would happen. So Wallace Shawn's from The Princess Bride. He plays Vizzini. That's his inconceivable line that you're familiar with. Some significant Brainiac stories. Panic in the Sky. That's probably the most iconic one. Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Brainiac. He was portrayed by James Marsters in Smallville and Blake Ritson in Krypton. Obviously a huge character in the animated shows. Super Friends, Brave and the Bold. Playable character in Injustice 2. He's also the boss of Injustice 2 if he appears for the first time in an actual movie. Hopefully, The Man of Tomorrow, which is the next Superman movie. I'm super excited about that. It'd be great to see someone besides Lex Luthor. Unfortunately, we never seem to quite get past Luthor and then Zod as the villains. But Superman has some great villains that would be great to see adapted. So fingers crossed for that. Brainiac's one of my favorites. Points breakdown for Brainiac. Personality 3, powers 4, mythology 5, design 5, cultural impact also 5. So 22 for Brainiac on the scale. Cultural impact, once again, the term Brainiac being part of typical lexicon helps with that, even though he hasn't been in a big movie. So going back over our list, number 10, Moon Man. Number 9, the creature from 40,000 AD. Number 8, Humpty Dumpty, aka the Curator, aka the Hobby Robber, Robert Hobb. Number 7, Klaxar. Number 6, Atom Master. Number 5, the Evil 3. Number 4, Titano. Number 3, Metallo. Number 2, Bizarro. Number 1, Brainiac. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time on Supervillain Spotlight.